of the residents of York Region are vaccinated. The amount of boosters being given continues to rise. Our hospitalizations are down. Surgeries, as many have been canceled, are being rescheduled. Normality, a new normal, is returning. But it is due in part to the sacrifices of Canadians, to Canadians following not the government's advice, but the advice of our public health officials. And we cannot lose sight of that fact. Many lives have been delayed. Many lives have been disrupted. Many Canadians have passed away from this pandemic. We cannot lose sight of the big picture. We are going the right way. We are making progress as a country, together. Not individually, but together. And Mr. Speaker, as a parliamentarian, I believe in doing what's right and communicating to my constituents the public health advisories, what should we do to protect our families and loved ones so we can get to a better day. And it is coming. Absolutely. We are seeing changes, especially at the provincial level, on restrictions. And that is the right thing to do. 90% of Canadians are vaccinated on the double dose. That is wonderful. We should be proud. We should be proud that we're protecting our healthcare system. We should thank the frontline workers for the last 2 years of what they sacrificed. That is what we should be doing. And we should continue, yes, to reevaluate the science. We cannot put an arbitrary date of when we can lift this or lift that. That doesn't work. We've seen it. Okay? We have seen that. We've seen it in province after province. If you've lifted prematurely, what happens? Your hospital system gets overwhelmed. Your ICU capacity gets overwhelmed. Your supply chain becomes disrupted. And you're back at square one. So let's go 10 steps forward at a time and maybe 1 step back instead of 4 steps forward and 20 steps back. And that's what our government is doing. We are there to continue to assist Canadians, and we will continue to do so. But as I started at the beginning, Mr. Speaker, and I'll go to my formal remarks, I want to thank Canadians today. I wish to say thank you for doing the right thing, for getting us through this pandemic as we continue to go. And yes, I believe the light is at the end of the tunnel. I do so. I completely have confidence in that. Why? Because of vaccines, because of the science of vaccines, and because we've done the right thing. And Canadians have been resilient. Mr. Speaker, I understand that the official opposition has come on side now to say that blockade should stop. A little kind of late, but yes, they should stop. We should not be interrupting the lives of auto workers, of farmers, of our agri-food business. Many of the opposition members represent rural ridings with a lot of farmers. I don't think it's very impressive that we're blocking borders where we can't ship our farm products to the United States. I don't think it's very impressive that auto workers are being forced to stay home because of blockades, which up until 3 days ago, that party there was in favor of. That's not reasonable leadership. I would call it the otherwise. We need to do what is right for Canadians, day in and day out. We are in a pandemic, a once in a 100-year event. It requires maturity, and it requires leadership, Mr. Speaker.
It also requires people to pay attention.
Mr. Speaker, it's been more than 2 years since our border measures were put in place and to help keep Canadians safe and protected. As the most serious public health crisis in the last century unfolded, the Government of Canada acted quickly to put in place emergency border measures to reduce the risk of the importation and transmission of COVID-19 and new variants in Canada related to international travel. The border measures that have been implemented are informed by data and available scientific evidence. Yes, scientific evidence, and not just pulling dates out of thin air. They also come from the monitoring of the epidemiological situation in Canada and in other countries. Measures are adjusted as required to respond to the evidence while continuing to protect the health of everyone in Canada. Starting in January 2020, enhanced screening measures were put in place for passengers who were arriving from areas where the COVID-19 virus was rampant. As the virus spread to other countries and became more of a danger, These screening measures were further enhanced with additional questions and referrals of incoming passengers to the Public Health Agency of Canada. Mr. Speaker, eventually stronger measures had to be put in place to protect our country, its citizens, such as the ban on foreign nationals entering Canada. Canada was not alone in closing its borders for discretionary travel at that time. Many other countries, including our neighbors to the south and largest trading partner and other G7 countries, also put in place severe restrictions on travel. As the pandemic wore on, the Government of Canada never lost its focus on the health and safety of all Canadians. Decisions around protocols and measures were taken to reduce the effects of COVID-19 on our citizens and, yes, on our economy. So, yes, we could quickly recover in terms of our Canadian economy. And it was great to see that our output is larger than it was pre-pandemic. It's great to see that employment levels are above where they were pre-pandemic. Why? Because we did what was right for Canadians. We had their backs. We put in place proper measures that we all know about, and we invested in Canadians. It was the right thing to do. Mr. Speaker, in June 2021, the government announced the first phase of its approach to easing border measures for travelers entering Canada. And the Government of Canada continues to make cautious adjustments to its border approach using the latest scientific evidence and data. These changes are possible thanks to our vaccine adoption rate and adherence to existing public health measures. The overwhelming majority of Canadians have adhered to protocols and measures, got vaccinated not only once, but twice, and for many, even a third booster. They have shown courage, resilience, compassion, and yes, have sacrificed. I thank them, as their actions have been crucial in giving us, the Government of Canada, the leeway to reduce and even remove some of the measures that were put in place at the beginning. Mr. Speaker, earlier measures have been adjusted. In August and September 2021, the government continued to reopen Canada's borders, allowing fully vaccinated leisure travelers from the U.S. to enter Canada starting on August 9th, followed by fully vaccinated travelers on non-essential trips from all other countries on September 7th. The government also eliminated the requirement to stay in government-authorized accommodation upon arrival. As I quickly conclude my remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want all parliamentarians to take a step back and look at the big picture of where we are and where we have been. And where we are is in a much better place. There's work to be done. There's progress to continue to be made. We must follow the science. I do ask, and I've asked this on national television, that the blockade stop, that the protests outside, with the utmost respect to those individuals protesting, that they go home and allow the citizens of Ottawa to regain their normal lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question commentaire. I know we've been trying really hard to get everybody to get an opportunity in, and a lot of the questions and answers have been very, very long. So I'm going to give it to the honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands to ask the question first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm enormously grateful. My question, member for Vaughan Woodbridge, is this. We seem to be debating in this House how we stop a pandemic as though the borders of Canada comprise the challenge. We are in a global situation where I think the virus may be laughing at all of humanity for thinking we can handle it while leaving much of the developing world without access to vaccines. I'll ask the honourable member, when will the Government of Canada support the request from India and South Africa to have a waiver under the Trade-Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, the so-called TRIPS agreement, so that developing countries have access to vaccines?
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
I'd like to thank the honourable colleague from Sandwich Gulf Islands, for that question. What I would say is Canada has been at the table in providing funds, resources, and vaccine as a part of the facility to developing countries. Obviously, we will work in unison, and as we always do with the WTO and all our trading partners, and that's who we are as a people and who we are as a country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question commentaire, questions and comments. The honourable member for Mission, Massey, Fraser Canyon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I met with one of the largest sound companies in British Columbia. They were ranked the #1 sound company in North America, Key & Sound and Universal Show Services. 2 years ago, they had to lay off 280 people. They've lost 99% of their revenue. They've taken advantage of every single government program. And they said to me, our government's helping our private industries into oblivion. They came to me and they said, Brad, what's the plan? When will the government give us any indication that we can get shows happening again? So to this member, the honorable member from Vaughan Woodbridge, when will the government release a plan to get private industries back to making money again? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge.
To the honourable colleague from Mission Fraser Canyon, what I would say, those restrictions in place preventing that business to operate are actually provincial restrictions. They deal with capacity, whether it's going to a basketball game or seeing a concert. With regards to the honourable colleague's question, I would refer to him to the province of British Columbia, but at the same time, what I would refer to him is to encourage all his residents and all Canadians to get vaccinated so we can again go to a concert or a basketball game with full capacity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question et commentaires, questions and comments. The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Honourable député de Thérèse de Blainville.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ma question, elle est simple. Pourquoi faut-il mettre autant de pression sur le gouvernement pour le convaincre d'agir, de sortir de l'ombre, de se manifester? Ça a été le cas dans le cas des frontières en 2020. On est en 2022. Où est le premier ministre? Où est le gouvernement pour des annonces assez régulières de ce qui s'en vient? Nous présenter un plan. Je comprends pas, vous semblez figé dans le temps de 2019. À vous écouter, là, on va être en confinement jusqu'à je sais pas quand. C'est quoi le problème?
Member from Vaughan Woodbridge.
I wish to thank the honourable member from Thérèse de Blainville pour cette question. What I will say is, of course, we continue to reevaluate the scientific evidence as it comes in, working with our public health partners, and we continue to make adjustments. That is what governing is about. That is what making decisions and showing leadership is about. That's what we've done for the last 2 years, and that's what we will continue to do, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, what we've seen throughout the course of the last 2 years, in my opinion, is continuous flip-flops from the Conservatives on various issues. We're never going to have enough vaccines. We're never getting vaccines. Then suddenly, where are all the vaccines? Why don't we have the vaccines yet? Same thing goes with closing borders. Why aren't the borders closed yet? Close the borders. Then suddenly, why aren't the borders open? Open the borders. They do everything based on a reaction that they have and emotions that they happen to feel that day, rather than actually follow the science. And that's what they can't seem to wrap their heads around, in my opinion, is actually following the science. I'm wondering if the member from Vaughan can provide his input into the importance of following the science as opposed to the day-to-day political emotions that you might have.
The honourable member for Vaughan Woodbridge, 30 seconds, a little more.
Mr. Speaker, very simply, Canadians want leadership, not flip-flopping. That's the first point I'll make. Whether it's been on the obtaining and procuring of vaccines, we've delivered. Whether it's been on rapid tests, we've delivered. Whether on personal property equipment, PPE, we've delivered for Canadians. We assisted Canadian businesses and workers, and through the pandemic, we'll continue to be there, and we'll get through this pandemic. We'll get through this stronger than ever. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Statements by members. Déclaration des députés. L'honorable député de Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The pandemic has made it abundantly clear that the health of our communities must be at the center of our work as parliamentarians. And if there's one lesson that I hope we learn from this, is that the pursuit of health must be a collective effort. We know that the worst of this storm has been weathered by low-income, marginalized communities, and those who face the greatest health risks. To come out of these difficult times stronger, we must combat inequality, promote inclusivity, and look to the social determinants of health for our answers. I often hear about amazing community health initiatives led by my constituents in Fredericton, and it's their voices and advocacy that shape my priorities and my understanding of what it means to truly take care of our neighbors. It means affordable housing and eliminating homelessness. It means adequate free mental health supports, pharmacare, fully accessible infrastructure, and a universal basic income to lift people out of poverty and allow everyone to reach their full potential. By implementing policies that ensure we take care of each other, our government can lead by example and promote healthy, resilient communities across Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is with a heavy heart that today I rise to honour the memory of one of my constituents. Stephen Rayfield was a firefighter from Castor, Alberta, who tragically lost his life this last week while responding to a call. While many run from danger, firefighters run towards it. And Stephen was a shining example of the selflessness that defines those men and women who serve in our fire departments across Canada, departments both big and small. General Norman Schwarzkopf once described courage as being fearful of something and going ahead to do it anyways. Stephen made the choice to serve, even though the conditions that night were treacherous. He served his community because his community needed a hero. Not only did Castor lose a firefighter, a loving wife also lost her husband, and his kids lost their dad. We pray God's blessings and peace for his wife Cheryl and his children as they grieve and navigate this difficult time. Heaven may have gained a hero, but Castor lost a piece of its heart and soul. We will never forget.
Here, here.
The honourable member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, $400 million worth of goods and services travel across the Ambassador Bridge each and every day. Auto parts, fruits and vegetables, medicine. It is the largest border crossing in North America, 25% of all trade between Canada and the United States. The blockade is putting thousands of jobs at risk, Mr. Speaker. Auto workers are on shutdown. Yep. Parts manufacturers are closing down. Right. Farmers cannot get their goods to market. More than goods, Mr. Speaker, the blockade impacts cross-border nurses and truckers who don't get paid if they don't deliver. This is hitting jobs, workers, and our supply chains that stock grocery stores from Windsor to Quebec. My community's message to the protesters: end this blockade today. My question to the Leader of the Opposition: when will the Conservatives stop pandering to the protesters and start standing up for workers of this country? Hear, hear.
Honorable député de Laurentides-Labelle.
Monsieur le Président, créé en 1997 pour faciliter l'accueil des producteurs québécois étrangers souhaitant tourner en région, Film Laurentides, aussi connu sous le nom de Bureau du cinéma et de la télévision des Laurentides, est aujourd'hui une référence incontournable. L'organisme amorce une 25e année d'activité d'accueil et de promotion. Cet accomplissement sera souligné par la diffusion au cours de l'année d'une rétrospective des principaux faits saillants qui ont contribué à rayonner dans les Laurentides. Alors, Film Laurentides génère des retombées économiques, touristiques et culturelles enviables, notamment dans les 3 MRC de ma circonscription de Laurentides-Labelle. Souhaitons à Film Laurentides et à son équipe une longue vie dédiée à mettre en valeur notre région et à offrir aux artistes et techniciens un milieu de travail à la hauteur de leur création. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
L'honorable député de Hochelaga.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Le mois de l'histoire des Noirs est un moment important car il nous permet de reconnaître la diversité de l'histoire et la réalisation des communautés noires partout au pays. J'aimerais souligner la contribution des femmes et des hommes noirs inspirants dans le comté de Hochelaga et à Montréal. Je pense notamment à Dominique Olivier, première femme noire à la présidence du comité exécutif de la Ville de Montréal. Yvette Bonny, pédiatre hématologue à l'hôpital Maisonneuve-Rosemont et première médecin à effectuer une greffe de moelle osseuse au Québec en 1972. Steve Joseph à la Fondation des aveugles du Québec. Cyril, Doro et Willy de Smart Lab à Montréal, situé sur la rue Sainte-Catherine de Hochelaga, qui aident la communauté en mettant à leur disposition leur studio. Et bien, beaucoup d'autres. Ces personnes de couleur ont brisé des plafonds de verre et contribuent à tous les jours à lutter contre la discrimination systémique. Aujourd'hui, ils sont des modèles de résilience. À toute la communauté noire d'Hochelaga et partout au pays, je vous souhaite de passer un merveilleux mois de l'histoire des Noirs. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Center, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan is known as the land of the living sky, and this is especially true for the riding of Moose Jaw Lake Center Lanigan, home of the Royal Canadian Snowbirds. On July 11th, 2021, the Snowbirds celebrated their 50th anniversary of their first public air show. Wow. Still fresh in my mind and on our hearts is the tragic loss of Captain Jennifer Casey in 2020 while on the mission to raise the spirits of Canadians enduring this pandemic. Undeterred by this tragic loss, the Snowbirds persevered to complete the mission in honor of their fallen comrade in their 50th year. This iconic team represents true Canadian values. The Snowbirds inspired Canadians who have been isolated and alone. They reached out to those who have been shut out. They lifted up the spirits of Canadians while leaving their own families at home. On behalf of my colleagues here, I salute you, snowbirds, and I wish you the best in the next 50 years.
Hear, 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 hear. The honourable member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Mr. Ralph Kyoto of Etobicoke Lakeshore on his recent appointment to the Order of Canada. Honored for his community engagement and generous philanthropy and for his leadership in the automotive industry. Mr. Kyoto came to Canada as a teenage immigrant from Italy, landing in Halifax at Pier 21. Through hard work and dedication, he became a successful entrepreneur, fulfilling a childhood dream to work with cars. He has done that in spades. He is the president of a top Chrysler dealership in Canada and is CEO of Active Green and Ross Auto Centers. Mr. Kyoto's business success is eclipsed only by his big heart. He is past president of the Rotary Club of Etobicoke, served as chair of the ever-popular Rotary Club Ribfest in Toronto, and he sits on the board of many other organizations, including Trillium Health Partners Foundation. Thanks in part to his endless generosity, Pier 21 has become the Canadian Museum of Immigration. Thank you, Mr. Kyoto, for all you do, and congratulations on your well-deserved recognition.
The honourable member for Brampton North.
As a mother of a young child in the Peel District School Board system, I know how much teachers have stepped up to make sure our children receive a quality education despite the challenges of the pandemic. All of our teachers deserve to be commended for their incredible work, and I want to give a special congratulations to Jason Bradshaw, a Brampton North resident and teacher at Castlebrook Secondary School. Jason received the 2021 Prime Minister's Award for Teaching Excellence, the highest award a teacher can receive in Canada. These teachers are chosen for their remarkable achievements in education and their commitment to preparing their students for a digital and innovation-based economy. Jason has been a teacher for over 14 years and strives to empower modern learners through innovative and unique approaches to learning. He encourages his students through discussion and debate while also running an after-school program called Counting on You to provide science and support and programming to students in need. Thank you, Jason, for everything you do for our students and for all of our teachers helping the next generation develop.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, I joined in recognizing the Anishinaabe partnering with the Shamish Culture Centre to provide vaccines to our Northeast Calgary communities. In the spirit of reconciliation, these clinics have been a huge success and have created a unique partnership between the Indigenous and the Sikh communities to serve the community at large. At the heart of these communities is a common goal and values of seva, sharing, and taking care of others. I would like to recognize this extremely successful initiative by the Shamish Culture Centre under the leadership of Amanpreet Singh Gill and the entire executive committee in partnership with the Siksika Nation, Siksika Health Services, Calgary Homeless Foundation, Aboriginal Friendship Centre of Calgary, and Okaki Health. Thank you to all the frontline health workers for all their hard work. We are stronger together, Mr. Speaker. God bless these communities so they may continue serving, and God bless a united, free Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with a sense of sadness, but also profound gratitude. Last month, we lost a political giant. Julian Reid, a longtime Liberal MPP and MP for Halton, passed away at Georgetown Hospital on January 6th at the age of 85. With a career in politics that spanned nearly 3 decades, Reid was a larger-than-life personality and a hard-working, dedicated public servant. And while most knew him as a politician, he was much more. He was a salesman, a pig farmer, and he even worked in show business as an actor. Mr. Reid was a pioneer. He was talking about renewable energy, cannabis decriminalization, and greenhouse gas emissions over 20 years ago. His fierce advocacy for environmental protection has certainly been an inspiration to me, and I'll continue to work and honor his legacy by fighting to protect the green spaces here in my riding of Milton. Like my dad, Julian lived with Parkinson's disease. His life and legacy strengthens my resolve to be a better advocate for Canadians fighting Parkinson's disease. Reid is survived by his wife, Deanna, his children, Chris, Rob, and Melanie, his 4 grandchildren, and his brother and my friend, Lori. Thank you for your service, Julian. Rest in peace.
The honourable member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, for 2 years, Canadians have been living with COVID-19 restrictions. Restrictions on travel, restrictions on visiting loved ones, restrictions on worshipping, children restricted from playing with other children or taking part in sports and other activities. 2 years of isolation that has inflamed Canada's mental health crisis and hurt our most vulnerable populations. Canadians just want their lives back. The Prime Minister needs to stop using the pandemic to wedge, divide, and stigmatize Canadians for his own political gain. It needs to stop. Conservatives are calling on the Liberal government to follow the evidence, follow the science, and table a plan to quickly end all federal mandates and restrictions. Canadians deserve a plan on how they're going to get their lives back. And it's time that the Prime Minister delivers that plan.
The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Mr. Speaker, what started with a message from truckers has turned into a cry from Canadians from across this country. They've had enough lockdowns and restrictions, enough mandates and job losses, enough of this government's overreach. Canadians want their lives and their freedoms back. Conservatives have heard the message. We will take up that fight and will continue standing up until all the federal mandates and lockdowns have ended. So the time has come for the blockades, like those of my riding at Coots, to come to an end. The Liberals have damaged our lives and our economy enough. Let's not cause further harm. It's time for the Liberals to stop politicizing this pandemic, stop wedging, dividing, and stigmatizing Canadians. Follow the science. Follow the current advice from experts. Follow many other countries in the leadership of some provinces. End the mandates and restrictions. Today, the government has an opportunity to provide a clear plan for reopening our country, as Canadians deserve. The only question is, will the Prime Minister and his government give them one? Thank you.
L'honorable député de Vimy.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Février est le mois de l'histoire des Noirs. En tant que députée de Vimy, j'ai la chance de représenter une circonscription engagée envers l'égalité raciale dans notre communauté et dans tout le Canada. Cet engagement se manifeste pleinement ce mois-ci alors que la Ville de Laval organise une grande variété d'activités et des événements qui rendent hommage aux Canadiens noirs qui ont façonné notre ville. Des expositions d'art aux spectacles musicaux, en passant par des courts-métrages et des conférenciers invités, tout le monde peut apprendre et réfléchir aux contributions de notre communauté noire tout au long de notre histoire. J'encourage mes électeurs et la population de Laval à se joindre à moi pour participer à ces incroyables événements et j'ai hâte de poursuivre les célébrations du mois de l'histoire des Noirs tout au long du mois de février. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Vancouver East.
The cost of the TMX jumped from $4.5 billion to $12.6 billion based on cost updates from 2 years ago. In the last 2 years, there's been significant delays in construction because of COVID-19, the forest fires and floods, failed HDD river crossings in the Thompson and Fraser rivers, and numerous environmental law violations. The commercial viability of TMX was on shaky grounds before, and now things could not be worse. Using the 2018 construction cost, the parliamentary budget officer noted that a 10% increase in construction costs will reduce the net present value of the TMX by $453 million to over $1 billion. And a one-year delay would reduce its value by $693 million to $888 million. There is no sugarcoating it. The white elephant is staring us in the eye. I'm calling on the Liberals to come clean and provide Canadians an updated cost estimate and schedule. Full transparency and accountability is required for this boondoggle.
L'honorable député de Berthier-Masquinongé.
Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, j'aimerais dédier mon allocution à Monsieur Douglas Blanchette et à une entreprise de ma circonscription, les pliages Masquinongé, dirigée de main de maître par Mme Monia Lacasse. C'est grâce à la collaboration entre M. Blanchette et l'équipe de l'entreprise que de nombreux sourires ont pu voir le jour. En effet, Les traîneaux-luges de M. Blanchette, adaptés aux personnes ayant un handicap, se sont multipliés quand celui-ci a donné les plans de son invention au pliage masquinongé. Alors, ils ont été en mesure de répondre à une demande croissante de parents séduits par l'opportunité de rendre accessible à leurs enfants, petits comme plus grands, cette joie de l'hiver qu'est la glissade. De plus, Mme Lacasse recycle de vieux skis et du bois, ce qui donne un aspect environnemental à cette initiative. Merci à tous ceux impliqués dans ce projet de rendre le bonheur contagieux en cette période difficile.
Bravo. The honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians across the country are saying enough is enough. Every day, new protests spring up here in Canada and around the globe. Today, we are facing the 4th day of a blockade at the Windsor-Detroit Bridge, the busiest border crossing in North America. 450 million in goods cross the border every day, Mr. Speaker. A prolonged closure will continue to cripple our economy. We need the Windsor-Detroit border to reopen, not today, not weeks from now. Canadians want their voices to be heard, Mr. Speaker. Meanwhile, our Prime Minister doubles down. 2 Liberals are calling him out for his divisive rhetoric and for using the pandemic for political gain. These protests and the consequences fall squarely on the Prime Minister's lap. After 2 weeks of dithering, the solution will not be simple. The Prime Minister must accept to meet with all leaders on Parliament Hill and find solutions to end the COVID mandates, end the blockades of our critical border infrastructure, and restore peace, order, and good government. Why won't the Prime Minister listen?
The honourable member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, this week is International Development Week, a chance for all of us to come together and celebrate our achievements in international development. Today, I'm particularly pleased to draw attention to Nutrition International, an international organization headquartered here in Canada, which this year is celebrating 30 years of making a difference for millions of people living in vulnerable situations. Nutrition is the difference between attending school and learning. It is the difference between fighting a disease and surviving it. It is the difference between giving birth and giving life. Every day, Nutrition International works hard to create this difference and to bring improved nutrition to people of the world who need it most. Thanks to the investments from Canada and other generous donors, Nutrition International reaches millions of people each year, more than 60 countries. Canada's contribution to Nutrition International world-class vitamin A program alone has helped save 5 million children's lives worldwide. As Canada seeks to advance its commitment to champion gender-sensitive nutrition initiatives to support the most vulnerable, particularly women and girls, I hope that my colleagues, both in government and across the aisle, will continue to support organizations like Nutrition International in their fight to give people fuller, healthier, and better lives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Almost 2 weeks since the beginning of this impasse. We all want the protests to end and these Canadians to feel like they've been heard and respected. But now critical infrastructure is being restricted. Why? Because of this Prime Minister's failure. I've asked the Prime Minister to meet with me and the other opposition leaders in good faith to try to find a way forward from this impasse. He didn't answer yesterday. He hasn't answered to date. I'm going to ask him again. Will he meet with us?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada has spent the last 2 weeks endorsing and enabling these blockades across the country. The leader of the Conservative Party and her team have been their biggest champions, even promoting their fundraising. The consequences of these actions are having dire impacts. They're impacting trade, they're hurting job economy, and they're obstructing our communities. I am focused on ending it. I hope the Leader of the Opposition will maintain her current position and continue to call for an end to these blockades.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Continues to blame others for things that he's responsible for. Today, he actually has a chance to do something for Canadians. We have a motion before this House that would tell the government to let Canadians know when they are going to end these restrictions. 2 years into this pandemic, and given the current circumstances, it's not an unreasonable request. Canadians deserve a Prime Minister who's willing to follow science and lift the restrictions. Even his own Liberal MPs agree with us. So a simple question for the Prime Minister. Will he and his fellow Liberal members of Parliament support our motion that is on the floor today?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, everyone in this country is sick and tired of lockdowns and, quite frankly, of COVID-19. But Canadians also know that the way through this pandemic is by listening to science, is by following public health advice, and indeed by getting vaccinated. That is what we have been focused on from the very beginning, and that's why we're continuing to encourage Canadians to please get vaccinated. About 61,000 Canadians got their first dose just last week. We need more people to continue to step up, get vaccinated, get their kids vaccinated, get the booster shot. That's how we stay safe. That's how we support our frontline health workers.
The Leader of the Opposition.
So I have a question for the Prime Minister, because he's talking about vaccinations. We all support vaccines, and 90%, as he has said, 90% of Canadians have been vaccinated. Yep. Is he suggesting that unless 100% of Canadians are vaccinated, he's not even going to consider opening up and lifting restrictions? Yeah. Is that what he's trying to tell us? 90% is good for us, and I would say other countries in the world who have less vaccine uptake. Is he saying he's not going to do anything until 100% of Canadians are vaccinated? Really?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, not only are Canadians tired of this pandemic, of the challenges we're facing, but they are also, of course, tired of the restrictions, tired of the rules, tired of the lockdowns. That is understandable. But you know what helps lift restrictions? Do you know what helps move beyond lockdowns? Vaccinations. When Canadians get vaccinated, including with our vaccine mandates that ensure the federal public service and anyone getting on planes or trains are vaccinated, that has helped move forward, keep Canadians safe, and most importantly, to keep our frontline health workers who've been heroes during this pandemic from being overwhelmed.
Honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
Monsieur le Président, je n'ai pas entendu de réponse de la part du Premier ministre. Le Canada est un des pays les plus vaccinés au monde. Près de 90% des gens au Canada sont vaccinés, comme l'a dit le Premier ministre. Est-ce que le Premier ministre s'attend à ce que 100% des Canadiens soient vaccinés pour commencer à penser à présenter un plan de réouverture de notre économie et mettre fin à l'obligation vaccinale, Monsieur le Président? La question est claire. Est-ce que c'est l'objectif du Premier ministre d'attendre que 100% des Canadiens soient vaccinés pour commencer à redonner de l'espoir aux gens? Oui ou non?
Les honorables Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, le Parti conservateur du Canada a passé les 2 dernières semaines à approuver et à encourager ces barrages érigés à travers le pays. La chef du Parti conservateur et son équipe ont été les plus ardents porte-parole, allant même jusqu'à promouvoir le financement de ces barricades. Ces actions ont des conséquences désastreuses pour nos emplois, pour le commerce, pour les obstructions dans nos communautés, pour les familles. J'espère que le Parti conservateur va continuer avec sa position d'aujourd'hui et de continuer à appeler à une fin à ces barricades.
L'honorable député de Mégantic-L'Érable.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président, et j'espère que le Premier ministre ne se cachera pas encore comme il l'a fait au cours des 2 dernières semaines et qu'il sera présent, Monsieur le Président, pour être en mesure de justement de parler et d'écouter et de faire en sorte qu'on puisse mettre fin à ces protestations. On veut la fin des protestations, on veut la fin des manifestations, mais on veut aussi que le Premier ministre s'engage à présenter aux Canadiens et Canadiennes un plan. On veut que ce Premier ministre fasse ce que tous les autres paliers de gouvernement ici au Canada ont déjà fait, présenter un plan de réouverture à la population. Pourquoi est-ce qu'il s'entête à refuser d'écouter les Canadiens et à présenter un plan et de redonner un peu d'espoir aux Canadiens, Monsieur le Président?
Honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, je suis très content d'entendre l'honorable député condamner et appeler à une fin à ces barricades aujourd'hui dans cette Chambre. J'espère qu'il va pouvoir convaincre ses collègues au Parti conservateur aussi d'arrêter d'appuyer et d'encourager ces barricades, d'encourager ces manifestants qui font mal au commerce, qui font mal aux emplois, qui font mal aux chaînes d'approvisionnement, qui font mal aux Canadiens dans les communautés à travers le pays. Il est temps que ces barricades terminent et le Parti conservateur doit être sans équivoque là-dessus.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Prenons un peu de hauteur. J'ai demandé au premier ministre une rencontre. La chef de l'opposition officielle a demandé une convocation des chefs de parti. Il y a de possibles développements extrêmement troublants à Ottawa et ailleurs à travers le Canada présentement, avec des enjeux économiques significatifs, des enjeux de santé publique et de plus en plus des enjeux de sécurité publique. Est-ce que le premier ministre peut convoquer les chefs de parti à une rencontre d'urgence?
Les honorables premiers ministres.
Au début de cette pandémie, de cette crise de barricades, je suis en contact étroit avec des partenaires aux différents paliers de gouvernement, avec des conversations avec d'autres parlementaires, et je suis très content d'offrir au chef du Bloc un brefage pour qu'il soit mis au jour sur la situation auquel les gens sont en train de faire face ici à Ottawa et à travers le pays. Nous allons continuer de rester focusés sur la fin de ces barricades, le travail que nous devons faire pour protéger notre économie et pour soutenir nos communautés à travers le pays.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Le brefage que je souhaite implique la présence de la chef de l'opposition officielle, du chef de la troisième opposition, ma présence et, Monsieur le Premier ministre, la vôtre. Il y a des obstructions au service d'appel d'urgence à Ottawa. Il y a de l'obstruction de circulation autour de l'aéroport d'Ottawa. Il y a un arbre qui se creuse des racines et qui n'en sera que plus difficile à arracher. Un ami de mon père disait que j'étais pas assez fou pour mettre le feu, pas assez feu pour l'éteindre, pas assez fin pour l'éteindre. Est-ce que le premier ministre veut éteindre le feu?
Le premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, ce gouvernement est en train d'agir à tous les jours avec nos partenaires pour réduire l'impact sur l'économie de ces barricades. On est là avec la police d'Ottawa, on est là avec le gouvernement d'Ontario, avec qui j'ai parlé longuement hier soir avec le premier ministre Ford. Nous allons continuer de faire le travail nécessaire pour s'assurer que les Canadiens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays ne soient pas dérangés, ne soient pas affectés par ces barricades illégales.
The member for Burnaby South.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the second week of the siege in Ottawa. We've got borders that are shut down across the country, including Coots and the Ambassador Bridge. This is hurting workers, truckers, small businesses, and families. We've got a prime minister who's more focused on debating whose jurisdiction it is. Clearly, making sure our borders are open is a responsibility of the federal government. So will the prime minister stop hiding behind jurisdiction and fix this mess?
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, we have been there to support all orders of government and the work we needed to do.
I'd like the Prime Minister to start over. They were applauding so much for his answer, I mean, they couldn't hear it. The Right Honourable Prime Minister, please go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning of this crisis around blockades in Ottawa and elsewhere, we've been working closely with partners on the ground. We've been furnishing resources. We've been furnishing RCMP officers. We've been furnishing tactical supports as we move forward through this. We understand how important it is to put an end to these barricades. We understand how important it is for people to get their lives back, to be able to get their livelihoods back. That's why we're calling upon the Conservative Party that has for the past 2 weeks been enabling, supporting, and cheering on these blockades to stay consistent in saying that they have to end, that we have to get our lives back, all of us as Canadians.
Here, here.
L'honorable député de Burnaby Sud.
On est dans la deuxième semaine de la siège à Ottawa et on a des frontières à travers le pays qui sont arrêtées par la manifestation du convoi. Au lieu de régler les problèmes qui frappent fort sur les familles, sur les travailleurs et travailleuses, sur les camionneurs, on a un premier ministre qui veut débattre la juridiction. C'est clair, il n'y a pas un débat. C'est le travail du niveau fédéral de s'assurer que nos frontières fonctionnent. Donc, le premier ministre va-t-il arrêter de débattre la juridiction et régler le problème.
Honorable Premier ministre.
Monsieur le Président, depuis le début de cette crise, nous travaillons main dans la main avec les différentes juridictions en leur offrant les ressources nécessaires, que ce soit des officiers de la GRC, que ce soit du soutien en ressources ou techniques. Nous allons continuer de respecter les juridictions, mais être là à chaque étape pour faire tout ce qui est nécessaire pour en finir avec ces barricades. Malheureusement, on ne peut pas dire la même chose du Parti conservateur qui, depuis 2 semaines, est en train d'encourager, d'applaudir ces barricades, même de faire des appels de financement pour eux. La réalité, Monsieur le Président, c'est qu'il est temps que ça finisse parce que ça fait mal aux Canadiens.
Honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government continues to use vaccines as a political weapon rather than a tool. Unlike other governments, they can't seem to figure out how to move forward. We don't need more job vacancies or supply chain issues. Canada and Canadians need to get back to normal. Instead of creating new vaccine mandates for federally regulated workplaces, will this minister listen to the science and his MPs and move towards lifting these mandates?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to answer to this question, speaking about vaccination. The Prime Minister mentioned just a moment ago that 80% of Canadians of all ages have received their full doses. Now, about 10,000 every day more Canadians are getting their first vaccine. 55% have received a booster dose. Every day, 180,000 people in Canada receive a booster dose. And we have approximately 50% of children between 5 and 11 being vaccinated. About 6,000 of them every day receive their first dose.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to remind all the members that if they're not speaking and they're in their seat, please wear your masks. It's the rules of the House. And for those of them who can't hear me, do I have to say it again? So some people, there we go. I think we have attention. Good. The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Monsieur le Président, 98% des employés fédéraux ont reçu au moins une dose de vaccin. Ils ne sont pas les ennemis. Même la Santé publique du Canada a affirmé qu'il est temps de réévaluer les mesures existantes et non garder aveuglément les restrictions actuelles. Est-ce que le ministre est d'accord avec les recommandations de la Dr Tam ou est-ce qu'il préfère ignorer la science?
L'honorable ministre de la Santé.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et la députée a tellement raison de féliciter 99% des employés de la fonction publique qui se sont vaccinés. La vaccination, Monsieur le Président, ce n'est pas une punition. La vaccination, c'est une protection. Lorsqu'on se fait vacciner, on se protège soi-même. On protège ses collègues de travail, on protège sa famille, on protège ses enfants, sa communauté, ses amis. Ce n'est pas une punition, Monsieur le Président. En fait, c'est la seule façon de passer à travers cette vague que nous connaissons et toutes les autres vagues et tous les autres variants qui apparaîtront dans les prochains mois et les prochaines années.
Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been misled. Our travel restrictions are not symmetrical with the United States. Our requirements for an arrival PCR test is the only one in the G7, and the minister knows that. PCR arrivals testing is wasteful, it's punitive, and it's ineffective. Canadians want to know what day will this government drop these ineffective and costly travel restrictions?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of science, I want to remind every member of this House that we are still in a pandemic. We still have thousands of people in hospitals. We still have thousands of surgeries being cancelled. So we will follow the science, Mr. Speaker, and as conditions change, we will change our regulations and we will change our rules. But we cannot take advice from a Conservative Party that hasn't even been able to convince Canadians of vaccination. We will take advice from scientists and from our public health workers.
A member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, can somebody update the minister's talking points? Across the country, provincial governments are listening and they are presenting plans. The Chief Public Health Officer of Canada, as well as provincial health officers, have all said it's time. 90% of Canadians are vaccinated, so I'm asking the Prime Minister when he will stop traumatizing Canadians and give us a plan to live our lives with COVID. What is the threshold? What day will he lift the restrictions?
The Honourable Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, I want to bring my colleague back to earth. We are in the middle of a pandemic. We have thousands of people in hospitals. We have surgeries being cancelled. We will adjust our measures as the circumstances change. And the way we change our measures is by listening to scientists, by listening to experts.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing the response. The noise is just too high. So I'm going to ask the Minister to start again so I can hear the full answer. The Honourable Minister of Transport, please.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians understand that we all need to follow science to protect our loved ones and to protect our healthcare workers. Canadians will do whatever it takes to protect their loved one. I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, our government will do what is needed to protect our health and to protect our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. The Honourable Member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, diapers, baby food, groceries, fresh produce, manufacturing, and our auto sector are at risk. The Essex winter border brings the necessities of life to Canadians. It can also bring our country to its knees, Mr. Speaker. We must have open, honest dialogue with Canadians. My bags are packed. Will the Prime Minister commit right now to fly with me to Windsor and then to Washington to give Canadians their lives back by ending the mandates once and for all?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
Speaker, speaking of honest dialogue, can we be honest here where the Conservative Party for the last 2 weeks have been justifying blockades and protests, for the last 2 weeks have been absolving the responsibility of lawbreakers and cutting our supply chains. Mr. Speaker, we will stand firm. These blockades are illegal. They must end today. They're having an impact on our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lambton Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, traffic over the Blue Water Bridge, which is a direct link to my riding of Lambton Kent Middlesex, is backed up because this Liberal government won't lift the mandates. Our Prime Minister's divisive words only add fuel to the fire and encourage the blockades. There's tractors parked out on the 401 right now. The Prime Minister is doing nothing to stop the division he's created and give hope to our nation that is beautiful but weary. Mr. Speaker, what is the Prime Minister doing today to end the mandates and restore Canada's supply chains?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of flaming and fueling the fire, these Conservatives for 2 weeks have been providing excuses for lawbreakers, have been providing justification for saying people are above the law. You know, they may have changed their leader, but they continue to flip-flop, Mr. Speaker. This Conservative Party must condemn blockades and call on all of them to go home so we can restore order in our supply chain.
L'honorable député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Circonstances de crise, je ne peux malheureusement pas poser ma question au Premier ministre. Il se comporte et les réponses du gouvernement laissent croire qu'on est en campagne électorale contre les conservateurs. Ce n'est pas ça la nature de la crise. Nous sommes tous ici élus dans nos circonscriptions, toute la gang. Et nous avons le droit d'avoir des réponses réelles et sérieuses aux enjeux de crise qui sont devant nous. J'ai même offert de respecter la confidentialité de ce qui serait dit dans cette rencontre, à défaut d'un comportement responsable du premier ministre. Est-ce que la vice-première ministre peut lui dire de convoquer une rencontre des chefs de parti?
Bravo! The Honourable Government House Leader.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je suis ici et je suis absolument prêt de parler avec toutes des autres partis. On a des discussions chaque jour avec les situations actuelles et on va travailler, essayer de travailler avec chaque parti. Mais je dois dire clairement, pour le Parti conservateur qui est là avec la manifestation, qui c'est pas légal. C'est le temps d'arrêter ça totalement, s'il vous plaît. On doit travailler ensemble de finir la manifestation à l'extérieur maintenant.
Le député de Belleuil-Chambly.
Président, on doit travailler ensemble. La dernière fois que j'ai vérifié, le leader n'était pas premier ministre. Le premier ministre doit prendre ses responsabilités. Est-ce qu'ils ont commencé à se demander, ils ont l'air d'avoir du fun, là, est-ce qu'ils ont commencé à se demander ce qu'ils vont nous répondre lundi, après une 3e fin de semaine de siège et des obstructions à la circulation, à l'aéroport, aux communications d'urgence? Est-ce qu'ils ont commencé à se demander ça ou ils ont encore trop de fun?
L'honorable leader du gouvernement à la Chambre.
Monsieur le Président, pour 2 semaines, chaque jour, le Parti conservateur a appuyé la manifestation illégale à l'extérieur. Le Parti conservateur a été là de prendre des photos avec des personnes, de donner le café et des autres types de choses, et c'est pas acceptable. Nous sommes ici chaque jour de réduire la tension et de trouver une solution, de ne pas jouer des politiques ou des jeux partisans. Alors oui, absolument, c'est le temps pour les personnes qui manifestent de quitter Ottawa et pour notre vie normale de continuer.
Honorable député d'Avignon-la-Métis-Matane, Matapédia.
Monsieur le Président, le blocus du pont Ambassador, le siège du Parlement, les menaces à l'aéroport d'Ottawa, les blocages frontaliers en Alberta et au Manitoba, ce ne sont pas des gestes isolés. Ça ne relève pas d'une ville ou d'une province en particulier. C'est le Canada qui est ciblé. Et c'est pourquoi c'est le premier ministre du Canada qui doit prendre le leadership. On est devant une occupation organisée par des spécialistes en tactique policière et militaire et qui vise le gouvernement fédéral. Quand ce gouvernement va-t-il être à la hauteur de la crise qui se déroule sous ses yeux?
L'honorable ministre de la Sécurité publique.
Monsieur le Président, je veux remercier ma collègue pour la question. Depuis le début, nous soutenons la vie d'Ottawa, la communauté de Coutts, la communauté de Windsor, par ajouter des ressources. Il y a plusieurs officiers qui allaient au Ottawa, au Windsor, à Alberta, pour assurer tout le monde qu'il faut quitter cette convoi. Ça, c'est le temps. Maintenant, pour quitter, pour sortir de cette crise, il faut que les membres de le convoi vont chez eux.
The honourable member for Wellington, Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, Russia supplies almost half of Europe's gas. President Putin has threatened to cut off those gas supplies if Europe comes to Ukraine's defense. People will freeze, industry will shutter, Europe's economy will grind to a halt. President Biden has been rallying natural gas producing countries around the world to secure additional supplies in the event that happens. Can the government explain to this House why Canada, the world's 5th largest natural gas producer, cannot export liquefied natural gas from our east coast to assist our European allies?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, conversations with your European allies and Americans are happening, and we're coordinating our response. And we know that any further invasion by Russia of Ukraine will make sure that there is met with severe sanctions. And we will always find a way to help our allies. My colleague, Minister of Natural Resources, and myself, and many other cabinet ministers are involved in this question. Thank you.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Putin is inching closer and closer to invading Ukraine with every passing day. But this Liberal government is ignoring their pleas for help to fend off the attack. Ukraine doesn't need our binoculars, it needs our radar-sat images. Yes. You know, what good was it to send scopes for rifles without actually sending them the rifles to put the scopes on? Yes. So I ask, why is the Foreign Affairs Minister abandoning our friends and allies in Ukraine and saying, No, you're on your own.
Honourable Minister.
It's not because my colleague talks about Ukraine that necessarily the Ukrainian government agrees with what he's saying. I think he should look at what President Zelensky, President of Ukraine, Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, mentioned and said thank you to Canada for deterrence measures, including a $120 million loan and also extending and expanding Operation Unifier. On our side, on the diplomatic side, we're actively engaged and we will make sure that all deterrence measures are in place to make sure that there's no further invasion of Ukraine.
The Honourable Member for Charleswood, St. James, Assiniboia, Headingley.
Mr. Speaker, in a disturbing development, last week, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping met and jointly called on NATO to rule out expansion in Eastern Europe, denounced the new security formation in the Asia-Pacific region, and criticized the AUKUS Trilateral Pact, all three fundamental to the rules-based international order. Given Russia's aggressive posture on Ukraine and Xi's on Taiwan, can the minister advise on what date specific sanctions will be used to combat this new and very, very troubling alliance?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you to my colleague for this important question, because we both agree that it's extremely important that strong economic sanctions be imposed should there be a further invasion of Ukraine. And so I wanted to make sure that he understands that we're ready to impose these sanctions. And meanwhile, we're working in lockstep with our allies to make sure that we have a maximum impact with obviously the United States, the UK, but also with our EU partners.
For North Island Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, many seniors have been struggling as a part of the working poor for their whole lives. Bill C-12 proves that the Liberals made a colossal mistake with the GIS clawback. And still, these seniors are being told that they have to wait till May for help to come. We are hearing heartbreaking stories about seniors with only $70 left a month to cover food and medication. This while the cost of living skyrockets. Will the Minister of Seniors please explain to seniors who are receiving and living on $2.30 a day why they don't deserve an advance payment?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague very well knows, we've been there to support seniors, particularly those vulnerable seniors during this pandemic. And as announced in the financial and fiscal update, we will be delivering a one-time payment to fully compensate those affected in 2020. And this week, we introduced Bill C-12 to exclude any pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating their GIS going forward. Mr. Speaker, I hope we can all get behind this and quickly pass this bill to prevent any future reduction in GIS for low-income vulnerable seniors who took these benefits. I think we can all get behind this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Over the past 2 years, Canadians have relied on the news more than ever for updates, health guidance, and accurate information. But now members of the media are being targeted by convoys, experiencing harassment and even death threats while they work hard to keep Canadians informed. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has been practically silent. Yesterday, CTV Edmonton said that they will no longer display logos on their vehicles in order to protect their staff. What is the government doing to protect members of the media who are so vital to Canadians and to our democracy?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
And first of all, I want to echo the concerns that were expressed by my colleague. I hope all members would join in condemning any kind of intimidation, violence, or hate expressed towards the media, who play a fundamental role in reporting on current events, Mr. Speaker. And, right now, Mr. Speaker, it is important more than ever to ensure that the Canadian public are informed about the ways in which we are going to get out of this pandemic, which means peacefully, respectfully, and by getting vaccinated, Mr. Speaker. And I just hope that the Conservatives would finally join us in asking the members of the convoy to go home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Mississauga, Streetsville.
Mr. Speaker, this week is International Development Week. Reducing extreme poverty, advancing gender equality, and increasing access to education and healthcare for the most vulnerable are some of the many global initiatives that Canada has moved forward. While the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the lives of Canadians in many ways, globally the pandemic has a pressing impact on people elsewhere and hinders the progress of Canadian initiatives abroad. Can the Minister of International Development update this House on what Canada is doing to help their country in their vaccination campaigns? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Mississauga-Streetville for this very important question. On this International Development Week, we must recognize that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted the most vulnerable and low-income countries. This is why our government committed 200 million doses, and approximately 100 million doses have already been made available. Our contributions have supported the vaccination campaigns in Rwanda, Bangladesh, Guatemala, Nigeria, and many other countries. We will continue to ensure that vaccines and treatments reach the most vulnerable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are on a campaign against farmers. And recently, they have said they may mandate a reduction in nitrogen fertilizer use by 30%. A decision that would inflate food prices, decrease production, break farmers' bottom lines, and put tremendous pressure on supply chains. This proposed mandate is an arbitrary number from a government that is out of touch not only with farmers, but reality. Will the Liberal government today reverse course and scrap this illogical, unscientific, and out-of-touch mandate?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If there's something you can tell us is that we are on touch with we're not in touch with farmers. I spend my whole days, week and weekends talking to farmers. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that farmers are on board. Farmers care for the environment. Farmers care for their land. Farmers care for the water. And they are on board for sustainable agriculture because they know this is the right thing to do for them, for the environment, and for their consumers. Thank you.
Well, member for Lakeland Stubbs. Or sorry, Lakeland. I'm sorry.
Fertilizer use. Last year, I asked for evidence and about the impact on production. Well, it turns out their own departments haven't even done the research. They just speculated on the potential for optimizing fertilizer use. Well, Fertilizer Canada has the brutal facts. $10.4 billion in losses in canola, corn, and spring wheat alone, and farmers are hit with an ever-rising carbon tax. So from this farmer to that minister, why is the minister stopping crop growth and hurting Canadians who put food on all of our tables?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
I can assure you that this government is working with farmers for farmers, and farmers know how important it is for them to have a sustainable agriculture. They are good stewards of the land. Yes. They know they are the first one to be hit by climate change, and they are on board to adopt more sustainable practices. They are on board to get access to better energy-efficient technologies, and we are there to support them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Beauce.
Monsieur le Président, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre dans le secteur agricole cause de graves dommages aux producteurs et aux transformateurs. Dans ma circonscription, Olimel a une pénurie de plus de 200 employés dans son entreprise. Plus d'1 million de porcs ne pourront être abattus en Ontario et au Québec cette année. Aucun travailleur ne sera disponible avant juillet. Quand la ministre prendra-t-elle des mesures concrètes pour combattre les problèmes de main-d'œuvre et de capacité de transformation? Une date, Madame la ministre.
L'honorable ministre de l'Agriculture.
Je vais assurer mon collègue qu'on est très conscient de l'importance et de l'impact de la pénurie de main-d'œuvre à laquelle on fait face en ce moment, et particulièrement dans le secteur de la transformation alimentaire. Je vous assure que je travaille de très près avec mes collègues ministres de l'Immigration, ministres de l'Emploi, pour pouvoir améliorer nos programmes pour l'accueil des travailleurs étrangers temporaires, et je suis en constante collaboration avec le secteur pour le faire dans les meilleurs délais, de la meilleure façon possible. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
This government is still clawing back COVID benefits from fishermen. The Minister of Fisheries told me it's not her fault. Talk to the Minister of Revenue. The Minister of Revenue's office said, not our problem. Talk to the Minister of Employment. The Minister of Employment's office said, not me. Talk to Service Canada. Service Canada says, just ROEs here. Their motto in that cabinet is, don't ask me, I just work here. Will someone in the government, anyone, show some leadership and reverse the decision to claw back COVID benefits from fishermen?
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker. And I want to remind the member that the Fish Harvester Benefit and Grant Program was designed and rolled out very quickly because we needed to get support out the door when it was urgently needed. So we created a program that could meet these needs head on. And the terms of the program were clear from the beginning. It was designed for harvesters, especially self-employed commercial fish harvesters, because they weren't entitled to CERB. Mr. Speaker, we promised to be there for the hardworking men and women of our fisheries, and that's precisely what we did.
Member, l'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Monsieur le Président, il faut que le fédéral cesse de couper le supplément de revenu garanti des aînés qui ont reçu de la PCU. C'est inhumain de couper les vivres aux aînés les moins fortunés, ceux qui doivent continuer de travailler durant leur retraite seulement pour se nourrir et se loger. Là-dessus, on sait qu'on est d'accord avec la ministre, on est d'accord. Mais pourquoi attendre en juin pour arrêter de couper? On peut travailler ensemble, la ministre et nous. Elle sait qu'elle peut compter sur le Bloc québécois. Vraiment, le Bloc est du bord des aînés. Alors, qu'est-ce qui l'empêche d'agir plus vite?
Bravo. Honorable ministre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all agree just how difficult this pandemic has been for seniors, particularly those most vulnerable. And that is why we've actually worked extremely hard to strengthen income security for seniors, including increases to their GIS. And as my honorable colleague knows, we announced in the fiscal update that we will be delivering a one-time payment to those who receive benefits in 2020. And we also introduced Bill C-12 to exclude pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating GIS going forward. And I hope we can all count on all members of this House to pass this bill extremely quickly. Thank you.
Le député de Salaberry-sur-Roi.
Ministre, j'entends bien la ministre, mais on est en février, puis ce qu'elle dit, ça va se faire en mai et en juin. On sait que la ministre va déposer son projet de loi. On va être d'accord avec. Mais bien sûr, on veut qu'elle arrête de faire couper les SRG des travailleurs, des aînés. Aujourd'hui, ça fait 8 mois qu'on attend ça. Le problème, c'est qu'elle impose encore des mois de privation épouvantables à ces personnes-là. Jusqu'en mai pour être indemnisées, puis jusqu'en juin pour arrêter de se faire couper. Monsieur le Président, le ministre a le soutien entier du Bloc québécois pour agir. Alors pourquoi est-ce qu'elle n'en profite pas pour mettre en place une solution rapide?
Bravo! L'honorable ministre, the honorable minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government's priority from the very beginning has been there to support those most vulnerable seniors. And that's why we work so hard to strengthen income security for seniors, including the increase to their GIS. We moved very quickly to help seniors during the pandemic. We've also introduced, as my honorable colleague knows, Bill C-12 to exclude pandemic benefits for the purposes of calculating GIS going forward, while also making a major investments through a one-time payment for those seniors affected. We're on top of this, Mr. Speaker, and we'll always be there for seniors.
Member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans Affairs Canada is set to cut hundreds of disability benefits adjudicators in March. These adjudicators, Mr. Speaker, were hired to deal with the massive backlog at Veterans Affairs. So I asked the Honourable Minister what would happen when these people were cut with respect to the backlog. His answer, the backlog would increase 50% in just 9 months. So I asked the minister, will he commit to rescinding this decision, yes or no?
Well, Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and he's fully aware that we invested over $200 million into Veterans Affairs to make sure we're able to hire employees that in fact were fired by the previous government. And the 2021 budget included an extension of these resources so we could continue to address the backlog. We have seen a significant decrease in the backlog, in fact by 40%, and I can assure my honourable colleague that we will continue to decrease the backlog. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le député de Charbonneau-Saint-Charles.
Monsieur le Président, en 2015, le premier ministre avait promis de venir en aide aux anciens combattants. En 2018, il a donné l'impression qu'il ferait quelque chose en engageant des centaines de contractuels pour régler l'arriérage des milliers de demandes d'invalidité. Des demandes faites par des hommes et des femmes qui ont combattu au péril de leur vie pour notre pays. Aujourd'hui, les contrats sont échus. Ils refusent de s'engager à les renouveler, même s'il reste 34 000 dossiers en suspens en arriérage. Est-ce que le premier ministre va s'attaquer sérieusement au problème d'arriérage et renouveler les contrats?
The Honourable Minister of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's kind of rich to be getting this kind of question from a party that when they were in power, they fired 1,000 employees, cut funding to Veterans Affairs, and slashed budgets. In fact, they hurt veterans, and they hurt Veterans Affairs. I can assure my honourable colleague, yes, I will, I can assure my colleague that we will continue to make sure that we have the investment to continue to decrease the backlog. Our government has and will continue to make sure our veterans receive the appropriate accommodation they should get. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Epic Class Action Services Canada, that administers the federal government's $900 million settlement with armed forces members and veterans who experience sexual misconduct, has released private information about dozens of claimants. These survivors are now carelessly re-victimized again at the highest level. This is what unacceptable looks like. And the Privacy Commissioner is now investigating. What is the minister going to do to correct this and make sure that it never happens again?
Full Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is a concerning matter. Our government takes privacy seriously and with the utmost seriousness. EPIC is an independent court-appointed administrator for the misconduct class action settlement. It has advised DND CAF officials that the disclosure did not have the details or nature of any claims. DND and CAF are not involved in this disclosure, and class counsel have asked EPIC to ensure they take meaningful steps to contain and resolve this issue so it simply does not happen again. Their private information needs to be treated with the utmost care and seriousness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Le député de Pontiac.
Monsieur le Président, la transition vers une économie verte est aussi l'occasion pour nos entreprises d'innover et d'assurer la prospérité économique du Canada dans l'économie de demain. Est-ce que la ministre responsable de l'Agence de développement économique du Canada pour les régions du Québec peut informer cette Chambre des nouvelles initiatives importantes de relance verte pour les petites et moyennes entreprises du Québec?
Le ministre.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais d'abord remercier ma collègue pour son leadership dans Pontiac dans le cadre de la transition verte de notre économie. Nos PME contribuent de façon importante à la croissance économique, en plus d'être des atouts clés pour rebâtir une économie plus forte, inclusive et durable. En février, j'annoncerai donc près de 40 millions de dollars d'investissement pour plus de 20 projets novateurs du Québec. Ce sont des investissements stratégiques pour des projets visant à réduire l'impact environnemental et qui contribueront à l'économie de demain.
The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey, Owen Sound.
Mr. Speaker, I'll quote an email to the government sent by the Liberal MP for Thunder Bay Rainy River at the height of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan. Quote, I hate to tell you, but everyone on the ground considers our government's management of this, that it amounts so far to a total disaster, unquote. Afghanistan committee testimony indicates nothing has changed. Quote, at this time, it is not coming across that Afghanistan is a priority foreign policy issue for Canada. A Canadian moral stance is missing. Unquote. Mr. Speaker, why are the Liberal ministers failing to show leadership and accountability in dealing with this urgent humanitarian aid crisis?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our Canadian Armed Forces did everything we asked of them under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Canada was part of an air bridge with our allies that saved as many people as we could. Our armed forces worked around the clock to evacuate as many people as possible for as long as conditions permitted, including our former interpreters and local staff and citizens of allied countries. Under the leadership of my colleague, the Minister of Immigration, we are committed to bringing 40,000 Afghan refugees to Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Edmonton West.
Mr. Speaker, it wasn't enough for the Liberals when they paid out $9 million in CERB benefits to dead people last year. It's now been revealed that they've paid out $12 million in CERB to people abroad. Now, surely even this government realizes it's the CERB, not the oversee ERB. Will the minister guarantee to apologize to Canadians for this waste of taxpayers' money, stand and commit that they will recover every penny of these wasted funds?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, what we won't apologize for, in fact, we're extremely proud of, is having helped over 8 million Canadians who received the CERB when they needed it most at the beginning of this pandemic. Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, verifications are ongoing to identify individuals who received the CERB but may not be eligible, and claimants who are found to have received the benefit improperly will be required to reimburse the payment. Thank you.
Le député de Lévis-Lotbinière.
Monsieur le Président, les documents officiels de la Chambre nous rapportent que 1610 personnes ont reçu la PCU à des adresses étrangères du Canada. C'était bien une prestation canadienne d'urgence et non une prestation internationale. Personne à l'intérieur de ce gouvernement n'a posé de gestes pour éviter la perte de 11,9 millions de dollars. C'est un nouveau scandale! Monsieur le Président, est-ce qu'il existe un vaccin contre l'incompétence libérale?
L'honorable ministre.
Monsieur le Président, lorsque les Canadiens ont eu le plus besoin de soutien, nous avons agi rapidement et avons présenté la prestation canadienne d'urgence. Bien que la prestation canadienne d'urgence exige que la personne réside au Canada pour y avoir droit, il est arrivé que des bénéficiaires travaillent au Canada tout en ayant une adresse postale à l'étranger. Il s'agit notamment des personnes travaillant au Canada dans le cadre du programme des travailleurs étrangers. Le point, Monsieur le Président, c'est les personnes dans ces situations, s'ils répondaient tous les autres critères de la prestation canadienne, pouvaient en recevoir.
Member for Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, we know the Ottawa blockade isn't about truckers. 90% of truckers are vaccinated and they continue to play a vital role in keeping our economy running. Despite that, for the second week in a row, the residents of Ottawa have been forced to put up with unacceptable occupation, keeping local businesses closed and residents from being able to live their normal lives. Can the Minister of Public Safety provide an update to this House on the support our government is providing to help get life for the residents of Ontario back to normal? Thank you.
Minister.
I want to thank my colleague for the question, Mr. Speaker, and I hope all members will express solidarity with the people of Ottawa who've experienced grave disruption. People can't get to work, families can't drop off their kids to daycare, seniors can't get around. It's absolutely unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. That's why the government has worked to ensure that police have all of the resources that they need, and I'm pleased to report to members in this chamber that we've now provided 2 installments of additional resources of the RCMP. Mr. Speaker, our top priority on this side of the House is to ensure that the illegal blockades end, that we uphold the law, and that we ensure that people can get back to their lives, and I hope the Conservatives will join us in that. Thanks very much.
Member for Churchill, Kiwatanuk-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has lost $1.1 trillion in tax revenue in the last 20 years because of steady corporate tax cuts and flagrant tax evasion. This didn't just happen. Billionaires are laughing all the way to the bank thanks to their liberal and conservative friends. All the while, Canadians are left with skyrocketing costs, crippling student debt, and a growing housing crisis. When will this Liberal government stand up for Canadians and fix the rigged system designed by billionaires for billionaires and force them to pay their taxes?
Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, our government absolutely understands that everyone in Canada has to pay their fair share. Our tax base is what allows our government to provide essential programs like the early learning and childcare system that our government is delivering. And our government is absolutely committed to being tough on tax fraud. And I'd like to remind the member opposite that when we first formed government, we raised taxes on those at the very top and cut taxes on the middle class.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, earlier today I introduced a petition with almost 18,000 signatories, Canadians from every corner of the country calling on the government to fast-track the Canada Disability Benefit and lift up almost 1.5 million Canadians with disabilities out of poverty. It's now been almost 2 months since the Prime Minister last commented on this critical support. Can the Minister for Employment, Workplace Development and Disability Inclusion share when the governing party intends on reintroducing this legislation and commit to ensuring Canadians with disabilities are included every step of the way?
Honourable Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable colleague for his question and for his ongoing commitment to raise hundreds of thousands of Canadians living below the poverty line who are working-age Canadians with disabilities. I thank him also for working with members in all parties in this House and indeed the other House to secure and build common ground around the introduction of the Canada Disability Benefit legislation. We're working hard on this, Mr. Speaker. It was a platform commitment, it's a mandate commitment, and we will deliver. Thank you.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today for question period. C'est tout le temps que nous avons. Nous avons un rappel au règlement. We have the honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Speaker, there have been discussions, and I hope that if you seek it, you'll find unanimous consent for the following motion. That in the opinion of the House, the government should do more to address global vaccine equity by sharing resources, doses, and knowledge by taking the following actions. A, announcing its full support for a temporary waiver of the Agreement on Trade-Related Aspects of Intellectual Property Rights, the TRIPS Agreement, in relation to products and technologies related to the prevention, treatment, or containment of COVID-19 as proposed by India and South Africa to the World Trade Organization. B, facilitating the transfer of technology to manufacture COVID-19 vaccines around the world, including financial support for regional hubs such as the South Africa Technology Transfer Hub. C, following through on its own claims of the effectiveness of Canada's Access to Medicines regime, CAMR, by taking the necessary steps of adding COVID-19 vaccines and drugs to Schedule 1 of the Patent Act. D, donating at least 200 million doses of vaccine as promised to vulnerable populations around the world through COVAX by the end of 2022, through predictable and scheduled donations where timelines and quantities are transparently available to recipient countries and the public. E, increasing assistance with cold chain logistics and supplies to low-income countries receiving vaccines. F, delivering at least an additional $1.1 billion as a net addition to the international assistance envelope and existing departmental resources to address global vaccine equity in budget 2022, including $780 million to ACT Accelerator partners to purchase vaccines, tests, treatments, personal protective equipment, and oxygen in developing countries, and
I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut the honourable member off. I'm getting a lot of nays. I think we've gone far enough. They've got a gist of what it is. So I'm going to take that as I can ask the question. All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Nay, agreed. Okay, I'm sorry. We have another point of order. I'll keep this. L'honorable député de Longueuil, Charles Lemoine.
Mr. Speaker, there have been discussions amongst the parties, and if you seek it, I think you will find unanimous consent to adopt the following motion. That the House condemns the intimidation of citizens and journalists, the incessant honking, the arson attempts, the shooting of fireworks in the downtown core of Ottawa, the flooding of emergency lines such as 911 and the local police phone numbers by fake emergency calls, the blockage of essential road and infrastructure, and the overall siege situation currently being maintained by protesters on the streets of Ottawa and elsewhere in Canada, and calls on the protesters to end the blockades and the occupation immediately.
Hear, hear. All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. No, we don't have unanimous consent. Order. Order. We have another point of order. The honourable member for Red Deer Lacombe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's been discussions amongst the parties, and I think if you seek it, you will find unanimous consent for the following motion: that in the opinion of the House, those who question existing government policies should not be demonized by their Prime Minister and used to wedge, to divide, and stigmatize Canadians, and that the Prime Minister should listen to the member for Louis Hébert, who said it was time we stopped dividing people, pitting people against each other.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. Nay. I think that was pretty clear. Un autre appel au règlement, l'honorable député. Un rappel au règlement, l'honorable député de la Prairie.
Monsieur le Président, il y a une consultation entre les partis et je pense que vous constaterez qu'il y a consentement unanime à l'égard de la motion suivante. Que cette Chambre enjoigne le Premier ministre de rencontrer dans les plus brefs délais les chefs des 3 partis d'opposition afin de leur faire part de l'état de la situation autour du Parlement et de discuter des options disponibles afin de mettre un terme au siège d'Ottawa.
Que tous ceux qui s'opposent à ce que l'honorable député propose de la motion veuillent bien dire non. Non? Ah, nous n'avons pas d'accord. We have a point of order. Point of order. We have 2 points of order. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said in an answer today that those briefings would be available. I'm not sure why the Bloc would bring forward this motion.
Please do.
The Prime Minister said in an answer to a question today that those briefings would be available. I'm not sure why the Bloc felt the need to bring forward this UC motion.
Into debate. And the honourable member for Barrie Innisfil is rising on a point of order as well.
Thursday question, Mr. Speaker. Yep.
No, I think we'll do that one after the vote. You're Order. It being 3:17, pursuant to order made on Thursday, November 25th, 2021, la Chambre procédera maintenant au vote par appel nominal différé sur la motion à l'étape de la 2e lecture du projet de loi C8. Call in the members. La question est la suivante. Madame Freeland, appuyée par Madame Fortier, propose que le projet de loi C8, loi portant exécution de certaines dispositions de la mise à jour économique et budgétaire déposée au Parlement le 14 décembre 2021 et mettant en œuvre d'autres mesures soit maintenant lu une deuxième fois et renvoyé au Comité permanent des finances. The 10-minute period for members voting electronically has started, and the House will now proceed to the vote for members participating in person. All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Mr. Holland.
Mr. Holland.
Mr. Macaulay-Cardigan.
Mr. Macaulay-Cardigan.
Mr. Sajan.
Mr. Sajan.
Monsieur Duclos.
Monsieur Duclos.
Ms. Qualtrough.
Qualtrough.
Ms. Freeland.
Ms. Freeland.
Mr. Algabra.
Algabra.
Ms. Hutchings.
Ms. Hutchings.
Monsieur Boissonneau.
Mr. Boissonneau.
Ms. Jazek.
Ms. Jazek.
Mr. McKay.
Mr. McKay.
Madame Saint-Onge.
Madame Saint-Onge.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Mr. Lamoureux.
Monsieur McKinnon-Gatineau.
Mr. McKinnon-Gatineau.
Monsieur Leblanc.
Monsieur Leblanc.
Monsieur Miller.
Mr. Miller.
Mr. Mendicino.
Mr. Mendicino.
Madame Bibeau.
Madame Bibeau.
Mr. Hussein.
Mr. Hussein.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Sheehan.
Mr. Kuzmayarchuk.
Mr. Kuzmayarchuk.
Mr. Fillmore.
Fillmore.
Mr. Garrettson.
Mr. Garrettson.
Ms. Sahota.
Ms. Sahota.
Mr. Varani.
Mr. Varani.
Mr. Oliphant.
Mr. Oliphant.
Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Ms. DeBrusen.
Mr. Brusen.
Ms. Zarovitz.
Ms. Zarowitz.
Ms. Dillon.
Ms. Dillon.
Monsieur Elkoury.
Mr. Elkoury.
Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Hardy.
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Fisher.
Mrs. Romanado.
Mrs. Romanado.
Mr. Badaway.
Mr. Badaway.
Mr. Batiste.
Mr. Batiste.
Mr. Fragiscados.
Mr. Fragiscados.
Monsieur Drouin.
Mr. Drouin.
Madame Shanahan.
Madame Shanahan.
Mr. Sarai.
Mr. Sarai.
Mr. Sobara.
Mr. Sabara.
Mr. Weiler.
Mr. Weiler.
Madame Mendez.
Madame Mendez.
Mr. Turnbull.
Mr. Turnbull.
Ms. Bradford.
Ms. Bradford.
Mr. Hanley.
Mr. Hanley.
Ms. Hefner.
Ms. Hefner.
Mr. McDonald Malpeck.
Mr. McDonald Malpeck.
Ms. Taylor Roy.
Ms. Taylor Roy.
Monsieur Terrien.
Mr. Terrien.
Madame Normandin.
Madame Normandin.
Madame Gill.
Madame Gill.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Madame de Bellefeuille.
Monsieur Garon.
Monsieur Garon.
Monsieur Desilets.
Monsieur Desilets.
Madame Michaud.
Madame Michaud.
Madame Vignola.
Madame Vignola.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Julian.
Mr. Bachrach.
Mr. Bachrach.
Ms. Barron.
Ms. Barron.
Ms. Zarillo.
Ms. Zarillo.
Ms. May, Saanich Gulf Islands.
Ms. May, Saanich Gulf Islands.
Mr. Morris.
Mr. Morris.
Mr. Vong.
Mr. Vaughn.
All those opposed to the motion will please rise.
Ms. Bergen.
Bergen.
Ms. Findley.
Ms. Finley.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Nader.
Mr. Broussard.
Mr.